Right. Well, good morning to the latest edition of the FFS podcast with myself, Fintan Godkin, and Fraser Watson. And this morning we are delighted to be joined by Beth Pascall, an ultra runner of a very high standing and very well thought of in the field. And yeah, it's a great privilege to have you on here, Beth, this morning, and we look forward to listening to you and to asking you a few questions and getting your views on a few things. But first of all, Beth is not only an ultra runner; she's also a doctor. So I'd imagine her time is quite precious at the moment. But how are you, Beth? And how's the current situation sort of treating you?
I'm really well, thanks. And yeah, thanks for having me on and the opportunity to chat with you. I mean, I can't really complain. Things are going well. So I'm a pediatrician actually. So from a work point of view, I haven't, sometimes I feel a bit guilty actually that everyone's saying, oh yeah, well done. What a hit, like, an NHS hero and all of this. And we're, largely carrying on as normal. Not normal, as in there are lots of changes and things, but the work we're doing is still kind of the same. So I'd say for me, compared to most other people, things have been a lot more normal than they would, for some people. So yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks.
That's brilliant. I just want to obviously say is that you're an ultra runner who's competed in the Western States 100 and had a fourth place in that, the UTMB Mount Blanc, and had a fourth place in that. So what you're looking at, with ultra running, it's quite difficult to sort of have a benchmark of where things are, but they're classed as the D2 races in the world to sort out rankings and how people are performing against other top runners.
Yeah, sure.
So to have those, you could quite justifiably say you're ranked fourth in the world, but you're also like you've got a job, and which must be difficult to balance it all out. And I do know, I'm just getting to a point here, I do know that this year you were planning on taking a sabbatical from your work, from being a pediatrician doctor, to concentrate on the running. There's the last I sort of heard. I saw an interview with you, I think back in March, where that was all going to happen. I'd imagine none of that has happened.
No. But it's the same for everyone. No one's year is going to plan. So yeah, I plan to take 6 months out of work from February to beginning of August. So I had a few weeks, and then it was just as soon as we realised that there would be no travel or racing for the foreseeable future, I just went straight back to work. There was no thinking involved really. It was just the obvious thing to do.
Will you delay that sabbatical and take it a later date now, Beth?
I will try. Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's not like a straightforward thing that you have to apply through a special pathway and all of this. So I will try. But there's no guarantee it'll actually happen. Yeah.
Just for an insight here, Beth, just try explain why you came to making that decision and the obvious difficulties of working the hours you do. I assume there's a lot of night shifts, 12-hour shifts, even longer involved, combined for ultra marathons and so on, which obviously are more time consuming than most training. How did you combine the two, or could you not combine the two, and that's why you came to this?
I guess I do okay with combining the two, but I think I'd always wondered whether working was holding me back, and it could be that it's not at all. And actually, because I work, it stops me from training too much, and maybe a lot of the top runners are making that mistake of training too much and things. So it kind of keeps me in check. But I didn't know, and I felt like if I never tried to train full time and not work and not be doing the night shifts and other disruptive things that work does, I would never know whether I could be any better. So that's why I thought 6 months is a small amount of time that it's not going to adversely affect my career or anything if it didn't go well. So that was kind of my thinking, I guess. But yeah, I do sometimes struggle with work and things. I get ill a lot. I think that comes with working with children. So yeah, I pick up lots of every single viral illness going. And yeah, like working long shifts and night shifts and things really aren't good for your training. Although some people like to think that, that it's good for ultra training or good endurance training, but in reality, I don't think it's very good.
Because sport is now, and ultra running is no different, more scientific than it ever has been. In terms of diet, in terms of training regimes, in terms of what you should be doing on your off days, stretching and yoga patterns. Truly, that's an incredibly difficult thing to stick to if you're in a busy hospital shift. Especially on the nutritional side, I imagine.
Yeah, sure. Like, I guess for some people, being at work might be like recovery. But for me, because I'm on my feet all the time, it's not. So sometimes I have to treat like a long day at work as it's almost like a session, So if I'm working like a run of night shifts or long days, then I can't be training. There's no point in doing hard training in between because I'm just not getting the recovery. So when I'm working really hard, I tend to make all my training really easy. And then do my hard training when I think I've got a bit more recovery time in between sessions and things. But yeah, like normally, my recovery is suboptimal. And as we know, recovery is probably more important than the training itself, taking that seriously. So,
I mean, Just another point on that, just before I move back a little bit, is with your training. What sort of hours do you get to put in? Because I've seen some sort of pros, that like they're talking 30, 40 hours a week of training. I see you laughing there, so.
I don't even know. I've never even added it up how much training I do a week. I think it varies. So like as I said, because the shift pattern changes from week to week, and like working weekends and stuff, and some weeks will be much more than others. So I couldn't say there's an average a week that I put in, but for sure it's a lot less than 30 hours. But yeah, I don't know exactly how long.
I was trying to work out how they managed to do 40 hours of running. That's what they were saying in a week. That seems a lot. But but with ultra running, and it's taken off. It's quite a new sport, really. It's if you look at the Western States 100 in America, there, I think the guy who ran that, it was in 1974, when he first sort of set that up. So we're looking at 46 years of the sport growing really into what it is. What was your background and where did you come from and get into it?
So I used to run a bit at school. I would do cross country athletics and things, and I was okay. I was one of the best in my school, but I never was that good, and I never took it particularly seriously. We'd never train more than like twice a week at school anyway. So I didn't run when I went to university, and I didn't run at all. I took up rowing. I don't know why it's a bad idea. I'm not tall enough to be a rower, but I was a lightweight rower, and I did that for 3 years, and I trained quite hard, especially in the last couple of years. And I was training with a high performance squad, and kind of accidentally became a bit better at it and took it quite seriously. So I think it was during that time that I developed a really strong endurance base. And then when in sort of the latter years of medical school, I couldn't keep rowing at the same level, so I quit rowing. And I started doing a bit more running again, just as something to fit in around like a busy schedule. But absolutely had no intentions of taking it seriously. And then it was in my first couple of years of work that I started running some ultras. I think, like a lot of people, I probably read a few books. Well, I did read a few books, and I can't exactly remember which one it was, but that kind of made me think about, maybe I could run 100 miles or something. So yeah, that's basically where I got to. And I think because I had done some running before at school, and because I'd done this rowing, I was immediately quite well. I wasn't good at it, but I was okay. You know, I could run 100 miles and it not be too much of a problem. And even looking back to when I was a kid as well, like my parents had a farm and I was always running around, chasing animals and stuff. So I think that probably really helped as well.
Yeah, it is. I find it interesting really, because with ultra running, you know, it's sort of something going back probably like maybe 20 years ago. It was sort of like a unique sort of people involved in it, you know, a lot of older males maybe as well, like or middle-aged males, you know, it seemed to be, you know, when I was younger looking into it, but now it's sort of it has developed and it's become more of a I don't know, sort of, you know, there's more marketing involved in this, it's more hype around it, and there's people of all ages now as well, like, you know, you see like, you know, young 20-year-olds, you know, running 100 milers, whereas that was something that was, you know, probably people would take up ultra running after another sport maybe, or later on in life, but it's definitely sort of crossing all sort of genders and age ranges now, or seems to be, or has been maybe for the last 10 years or so. You know, have you noticed that when you've come into it, or do you find there's still sort of a demographic that is more prevalent?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think, traditionally it was a lot of slightly older people, and I think some people thought, oh, you know, you needed to be a bit older to be good at, to have the endurance to run ultras and things. But I think it maybe just wasn't quite, it wasn't seen as that cool for like the younger generation. But now that's completely changed, and I think we're realizing that that, you know, actually being super young is a good thing. And, you know, you can train harder, recover quicker and things like that. So, yeah, even in my time, I think, especially in the US, there are, you know, so many more younger athletes, like even, you know, like college athletes just finishing college and stuff, that are doing really, really well. So, yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be something that's more on the radar of youngsters, in the years to come.
Beth, you mentioned you started out as a runner and then you took a prolonged break to play other sports and sort of came back into the ultra side of it then a lot later on in life. Are you one of those people who glad you went that way, or do you look back now on missed opportunities and wish I'd got into this earlier, wish I'd specialised in it earlier, or do you think the break from it actually helped you to really want to come back and throw everything into this?
It's something I never even thought about, actually. No, I don't have any regrets. I'm not, I mean, yeah, maybe if I just run the whole way through, I probably would have had more success earlier. But no, it's not something that, I've honestly never thought about what would have happened if I'd you know, not come into it sort of, but even when I was, you know, when I started running, I was in my, like when I started running ultras, I was in my 20s. So that was actually still fairly young. So I don't think I missed a whole lot of time. Yeah. I was always thought of as like the youngster, but now I don't feel like that anymore.
No, it's a debate we've had with a few guests that, you know, getting the balance right when youngsters are growing up, and you want them to experience a broad range of sports, you know. But you look at some and you think, was there a missed opportunity there if maybe they concentrate and specialised on one thing that they could really excel at and go all the way through, but then you may be taking away the overall experience. And of course, the flip side of concentrating on it as well is a lot of these youngsters, they might get one sport hammered into them. They want to be successful. They get to 16, 17, 18. It doesn't quite, they grow disheartened, and that's it. They're done with whatever particular sport that may be, and they've got no interest in it again. So that's why I was interested to see if almost that break almost refreshed your love of it almost.
Yeah, potentially. But for me, it was, I can't even compare the two. So when I was running at school, it was running the 800 meters, you know, around a track. And that is so different to running in the mountains. You know, so they are so different. And I mean, if anything, like I would have loved to have taken my running a bit more seriously when I was at school, but yeah, I don't see those two stages of my life being connected in any way. And yeah, I have no regrets at all. But you're right. I think, having some sort of background in running, or just generally being fit and and running around a lot, really helped me with my ultra running that I'm doing now.
When you got back into the ultra running side, around what time did it dawn on you that, we obviously, hang on, this is something I can really compete in with the elite on the world stage here?
I think it was my first 100 miler, which was actually fairly early on. I for some reason, I think I did like 140 miler, and then my next race was 100 miles. And it was the Lakeland 100 actually. And I trained quite hard for it, but only because I thought you needed to train quite hard in order to run 100 miles, but not because I thought I was going to win or be in the top 10 or anything like that. So I came second in this race to Debbie Martin-Consani, who is a really talented Scottish runner. And at the time, I thought she was like, oh my God, she was amazing. And I was like, I can't believe I came second to her. And that was really cool. And that was when I felt really driven to actually, train a bit harder and think that I could be good at it. But I guess it's very difficult if you're racing at a reasonably high level in the UK, you still have no idea how you're going to compare on an international field. So yeah, I was keen to start racing internationally, but I really had no idea. And I think my first international race was at the Trail World Championships in 2016 perhaps, and I was 8th there. So that was another kind of big milestone for me, thinking, oh, okay, I could compete against, I can do well in an international field. So yeah, that really motivated me as well.
Did the game change for you from that point there, where it's a case of I fancy this, I've always enjoyed running, to hang on, if I take this proper seriously and up things, I can be amongst the best in the world here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was just shortly before that race that I got a coach for the first time and actually, started to train, have a bit more structure to my training and things. I still don't think at that point I thought I'd ever be doing it at a professional level or be, having time out of work and things to do it. I just felt like I was really excited about the whole thing, and I just wanted to be as best as I could be. But I never thought that, I was going to be, doing it how I am now, I guess.
That race, so you just said 2016, and that was also the year you became the UK trail champion. Is that right?
Yes, I think that was, I had to do that to qualify for the World Championships, or to get on the team anyway. So
talk us through that experience of winning that race and how that panned out for you.
That was a massive surprise. I only entered it as so the race was the Highland Fling, which was the trial for the British trail team. I only entered it fairly last minute because someone said I ought to. But yeah, I was never expecting to do particularly well, so it was a massive shock to win it. That was really, really cool, and potentially another milestone there, sort of a turning point in my career, I guess.
What distance is the Highland Fling?
53 miles.
53 miles, yeah. And so in the UK, so I was the UK Ultra Trail then. And then when you went to the Worlds, then what sort of distance was that at the?
50 miles.
50 miles.
Yeah.
Because that goes to another thing with ultras. You mentioned 800 meters and things. So when you've got sort of sport where you've got a marathon distance, you've got your 800s, your 1500s or whatever it is. It's quite a sort of, that's the distance, and that is the distance. And then as soon as you mention ultra runners, it gets quite hard sort of to put a benchmark really sometimes, isn't it? Because you have, the British UK Championships could be 53 miles. Then you've got, the Worlds is 50 mile race, and then you've got the 100 mile races like the Mount Blanc and the Western Western States. So, you know, what do you see as ultra? What do you see as your distance, or you know, from an insight there? What is the benchmark that people hold? What, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. So for me, it's 100 miles. Yeah, I absolutely see 100 miles as my distance, and now I kind of think, you know, 50 miles is okay, but it's a bit short for me, and I'm not going to do as well over a 50-mile distance. I mean, I think there is a big overlap, obviously, but I think ultra runners are, especially in sort of the higher end, think of themselves. I think the ITRA rank categories, which is the International Trail Running Association, they categorize races as extra long, long, and short. I think it is. And like extra long is anything over 100 kilometers. So I think the people who are running sort of over 100 kilometers can kind of group themselves together. They're like long ultra runners. Then you've got the sort of the middle distance ultra runners that are around sort of the 50 mile to 100k mark. And then you've got the people that run shorter distances. So your sky running, Golden Trail series, so anything less than 50 miles really. And I think that because there are so many races out there of so many distances, I think a lot of us, and so many different series of races going on at the same time, I think often we, as the sport's growing so fast as well, often we feel that there's a thinning at the higher level because people have to choose a specific distance. So I think that that more and more we're going to see ultra runners be not categorized, but I think there'll be more of a distinction between like the long ultra runners and the shorter people. So yeah, I do wonder if in the future we're going to be seen as distinct entities rather than all grouped together as ultra runners.
Well, it is, you know, I don't, you know, sort of, you know, running a marathon is great, but then, you know, we put events on, and you speak to people within the events industry, and you go to other events, and they say, oh yeah, we got an ultra running, and we're doing an ultra, and someone say I'm an ultra running, and then they, you know, they've done like a 30-mile race, and you know, I don't want to sort of belittle that, because running 30 miles is still an achievement by any stretch, but you sort of think, well, it's not really an ultra, is it? Although, you know, anything above the marathon is classed as it. I mean, 100 miles seems to me to be a, you know, it's obviously a round figure. It's a massive target, you know, and so
it's a fair distance.
It is a fair distance. I mean, 50 miles is a fair distance, to be fair. But yeah, so I mean, that's going on to professionalize, you know, looking at the sport growing, and it is growing. You say you got more younger people coming into it, people who are now sort of perhaps making a living out of it, or looking to. So to professionalize it, you'd say it has to go down well, it doesn't have to, but a categorize, you know, so if you want to sort of specialize at 100 milers or specialize at 50 milers, is that the way you see it going then within the industry and within sort of organizers having to sort of look at specific sort of distances that they're going to be putting on?
I think with growing professionalism in the sport and the depth of field at all these races is becoming so much greater, I think as an athlete, you're forced to specialize a bit more. So maybe like, you know, 20 years ago, you could run a 40-mile race and an 100-mile race and you could win both. But now I don't think you can do that, you know. I think you have to, in order to do well at a specific distance, you have to train specifically for that distance. And you can't just be all over the place, you know. Whereas, you know, if you're a track runner, you can run the 5,000 and the 10,000 meters. But I think it's becoming, harder and harder to do well at both in ultra running. So I think that there'll be less crossover in the future is my feeling. But sometimes it's challenging because it's difficult to work out what you're best at. But it's the same for all athletes in any discipline, I guess.
And I suppose as well, like you would still, if you were aiming for a 100 mile, like just say the Western States 100 mile 100, that you still may do as a training run, enter the odd event, which would be 40 mile or 50 mile.
Oh yeah,
just
yeah,
to give yourself,
absolutely.
You know, you perhaps you wouldn't go out to win that, but just to give yourself a training run, or you know, to test yourself over certain distances. But I mean, and this is another thing with, you know, the ultra that we find is quite. There's a lot of events on, which you touched on, around the country, and trying to get, you know, the best feel there, or to get people to sort of you know, buy into your events or commit to them. But what I've noticed is that you could put an event on and it'd be quite low key, but like a runner like yourself could turn up, or a well-known runner, and sort of smash the field. That, you know, they just come out of nowhere. Or then you could put them on and you just have sort of like a local feel to it, and it's all sort of local club runners. You know, is there anything that you look for in those events? So is there a, you know, like a British league of, you know, that a league table, or do you just pick events that you like the location or the thought of it, or you think, oh, that sounds like a challenging run? How do you sort of determine what you run in for your training runs and your
so when I'm racing in the UK,
yeah.
so say I were to do like a I guess most of the racing I do in the UK, and I'm not particularly happy about this, they're more like training runs, I guess. And yeah, there'll be some races I do that have a competitive field, and they're like a really good race. But yeah, I do a lot of sort of shorter ultras as training runs. And yeah, so location is a big thing, I guess. I want to run somewhere that would be, I mean, the whole point of doing a race as a training run is to go somewhere new or experience something different. So yeah, location and the course would be really, really important. And also I'd want it to be as specific to like a goal race as possible. So in terms of like climbing and terrain and things like that. And absolutely, like the biggest thing for me if I'm going to race in the UK would be like a competitive field. I think, as we've said before, because there are so many races out there, we feel as ultra runners that the field is often very thinned. So you don't get many top runners racing at the same race, unless it's like the UTMB or Western States a lot of the time. So if there's a competitive field at the race, that is like would be the biggest draw for me. We're always wanting like a really good race. And yeah, I mean that's it really. I think for me timing is important as well. So they've obviously got to be a good time in the build up to a bigger race and things like that. So yeah.
I mean,
have I answered your question?
You have answered it. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to add another bit on to that, which is sometimes you know, people don't always like, but you know, like to professionalize anything in sport, and if you've got people, you know, taking time off work, taking sabbaticals, or making a living out of it, you know, you've got to look at reward for them. And you know, as you know, event organizers as well, race organizers, if you're going to want the best people there, you know, to showcase your event, you know, you're going to have to look at some sort of reward for them, isn't it? But when we come out of this, you know, the virus at the moment, and the fact that everything's been put on hold, you know, there's possibly going to be some races may well stop, or some races may well carry on, but they'll be looking at how they can attract more people, and in what's going to be a competitive market. Whereas a sport, you know, you need to have that incentive for athletes. You know, is there much of an event industry in the UK where, you know, you've got prize money as worth thinking, you know, to earmark a race because that has got potential to subsidize your professional lifestyle as an athlete?
In the UK?
Yeah.
No. I don't. I'm trying to rack my brains now. I don't think there are some ultras that will offer small amounts of prize money. Internationally, there is definitely a big push towards prize money, with races like UTMB offering prize money now, and there's a few other races that have started to offer big prize money. But in the UK, no, there is very, very little, I would say. And I think that you're right, and the way the sport is going, I think that is probably the way that things are going to go, especially with like lots of competition between races and things. I think that yes, there are things that that runners like myself and others will draw us to specific races, but I think it's prize money is something, is we can't deny it is a big draw, because it does help with if you're going to take time off work and try and live a sort of more professional lifestyle, then it's certainly something that helps and is a big draw. But it's definitely a way the sport is heading, I think. And even the last few years internationally, there's been a big change and a big push towards more prize money, and I think that's what runners want, I guess, at the professional level.
On that note, Beth, you've represented Great Britain, obviously. I'm right in saying we spoke to I'm not trying to get you to say anything controversial here, but we spoke to a triathlete, Rhys Davis, a few weeks ago, and he did Great Britain and his career, and I asked him about that experience of wearing the British vest, and I fully expected him to come out and say it was one of the highlights of his of his career, if you like, and it was a great experience. And he was actually quite scathing about it. He said, it didn't mean a great deal to him. In fact, although you get to wear a British vest, it cost him a lot of money. Essentially, it wasn't something he did for free. It was almost something, you can have selection, but you pay for the privilege. You make a lot of sacrifices for the privilege. How was your experience? And I'm not asking you to, or suggesting you the same.
Yeah, sure.
Did you have to spend a lot of money yourself to represent Great Britain?
No.
No.
No. I thought it was a privilege, and we were very well looked after by British Athletics. Certainly didn't make any money from it, but we didn't pay anything. We didn't pay anything. But in a similar way, I wouldn't say it's like the highlight of my career or anything. I think the world championships and things are important to a lot of runners, but actually it's the other races, like the individual races like Western States or UTMB, that actually mean more to runners and mean more to sponsors and things like that than sort of world championships. But it was a fantastic experience. I enjoyed it. But it's not like I'm looking to next year and going to prioritize the World Trail Champions or anything like that. That's almost like a little bit further down the list of my priorities, I guess.
Sure. And another thing, obviously you live in the Peak District area. I imagine you do a lot of mountainous running. It's ideal for you in a way where you're based with a lot of your training.
Yeah.
Dispel this notion for us almost, because this was almost an ignorance I had towards ultra running. I assumed that if you were an ultra runner, you went out and you ran 1,000 miles or 1,000, hundreds, whatever, and that was your main form of training. But we touched on the science here. There's so much more involved now, so much more other aspects involved now. There isn't there? There's the weight training, there's the strength, there's the interval work. How much of your training is simply putting in long miles, as opposed to then the other aspects of it? Do you do a lot of speed work and weight work as well?
So it depends on the time of the year, actually. So like my training, well, maybe not my training now, because who knows what's happening, but so my training sort of normally in the summer in a build up to a big race would look completely different to what it would look like in January, for example. So say in January, I was doing some sort of marathon training. So I was doing more speed work, shorter sessions, and that type of thing. And I wasn't really doing any long runs. Like the longest run would be, well, I'm not sure I can call this a long run, but I might do like a marathon distance as the longest, but much shorter periods of time anyway.
Just a marathon,
but in a few hours, whereas in the summer, like you might go on a long run and you'd be in the mountains, and a marathon might take you all day. So certainly I periodize my training in that way. And then in the summer, I'd be doing much more specific long runs. So I'd still keep in a little bit, not speed work, but doing a bit of faster running. And then I'd be doing as much sort of specific training as possible. So doing long runs in the mountains on a similar terrain as possible to the race that I was doing. And I do I do some weight training all year round, not a lot, but a couple of times a week I'll do some stuff. And I'm doing some cycling at the moment as well. But I wouldn't do that in the winter. Partly personal preference, I guess. I'm a fair weather cyclist. But yeah, so certainly it's like, I would say, I don't know, like only 20% of my training is long runs in the mountains, on average, perhaps.
And another thing I'm interested in there, just going back to your UK win, I think a lot of us experience when we're doing runs, whether they be 5K, 10K, half marathons, whatever, and you get to the final few miles or whatever, and you're exhausted. And, you try and keep your wits about you, especially if you have a chance of winning or getting a high place, or if you've got people in front of you, you can take over and so on. But you're battling with your mind telling you to keep going over your physical exhaustion. I imagine in an ultra race, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. When you really have hit exhaustion point and there's a few hours to go, how aware of you, like, for instance, in 2016, I'm winning this race, so-and-so is this amount of time behind me, I've got to hold on here. Or like in Mont Blanc, so on, there's 3 people in front of me, they're this distance, I've got to try and catch them. Are you able to keep that mental awareness throughout the 50, 70, 100 miles, whatever the race may be? Or does it get to a point where it's simply exhaustion, finish, and then you learn your placing, so to speak?
I have been in the position where I'm been so exhausted, I just stopped caring. But a majority of the time, I'm racing and I'm really aware of what's going on. You often get a lot of information from, even if you don't have a crew or something, you're getting a lot of information from spectators and things, like, oh, so-and-so's 5 minutes ahead, or I can see them at the top of the hill or whatever. You do get a lot. It's impossible to avoid getting that information. I feel like I'm in a racing mindset the whole way through, even the last 20 miles of a 100-miler. I'm very aware and I'm in race mode. But yeah, there's been a few occasions when races haven't gone to plan, that I've just been, I'm just getting to the finish line, I just don't care anymore. But that's fairly rare, I would say.
I mean, on that thing that you're talking about, your training and building up to an event, and whether you do speed work, hill work, or slow runs. But how do you prepare mentally for this? I mean, I watched the documentary the other day on the Western States, and and I mean that's a hell of a race. Like, I mean, actually it sort of talks about, 1 minute you're up in the mountains in the snow, and then you're down in the canyons and it's 100 degrees or something like that. It's but also, what drives you personally to keep, for those distances?
So I think a few years ago, it was all intrinsic motivation. And I don't know exactly where it came from, but I was doing it for myself. Like, I wasn't doing it for anybody else. It was just to prove something to myself, I guess. And I don't really know what that was. But I do admit that now, even though I like to think that most of my motivation is intrinsic, that there are other people in the picture, that, how well I do in a race kind of matters to other people as well, which does sort of keep me going when things are getting really tough. So I don't know, for example, like if I'm having a really tough time in a race, I'll think, my boyfriend came all the way out here to crew for me and crew for all the other races I've done, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and he's here, and I don't want to let people like that down. And I guess, I have to admit that, sponsors and things, sometimes you feel like you don't want to let them down either. So there are a few kind of extrinsic motivators, but I would still say mainly it's coming from myself, because it's what I want to do. And often I remind myself of that when I'm having a really tough time in races. Like, I chose to do this. Like, no one else told me to do it. I chose to do this. I've just got myself to blame for being in this position. And you have to remember that it's really a privilege to be there. No one told you had to do it. So.
And there is a few cliches that people use in sport, isn't it? Like, you're in the race for yourself, and it's about how well you do and doing the best that you can do. But I'd imagine in those ultras that comes into even more of a standard because of the amount of time that you're out there, the amount of distance you've got to do. It's like, you know, if you're doing a 100 miler that you think that you could sort of win, but you're having an off day, and there's a couple of other runners turned up and they're having great days, and they're 20 miles ahead of you, and you've got 70 miles to go. That's where you sort of you have to sort of dig deep, isn't it? You have to go and finish that last 30 miles, maybe not performing how you are, or even sometimes you're performing the best you could be, but on the day someone is just better, isn't it? So, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can only do as well as you can do, and I am fairly rarely upset by a result in a race, to be honest, because I feel like I always do my best, and if someone's faster, then there's huge respect to them for being faster, but I'm not going to get upset about it. Yeah, sure.
Do you find the margin of error, obviously, when you're talking 800 meters and things like that, we're talking seconds, but in the ultras, it's always, again, watching that documentary, is always the chance that the person in front, anything could happen to them. So you've always got to keep that mindset as well, that you've always got a chance, of performing, but also, I think it's got to be about yourself, sort of as well, really. You say yourself finishing for your friends and family and your sponsors, to get you through it, because there's so many variables, like, and bad nutrition, and that's what I was going to get on to. How do you manage your nutrition on those big events, for people who listen, who may be thinking, nutrition is such an important thing that people get wrong, or don't take seriously, or will try some gels on a day of an event that they've never tried before and it just doesn't work for them. Like, how do you manage yours?
So I think one of the main reasons that I'm okay at running ultras is because I'm really good at eating. So yeah, I have at the moment I have a really simple strategy, which is that I use a specific gel. It's called a spring energy gel, and there's no maltodextrin or simple sugars in it. It's more like complex carbohydrates, so it's like pureed rice and fruit and things like that. And I will take 4 an hour indefinitely, so 26 hours, 32 hours, whatever.
During a run now? During
a race. And that's what I do, and I've just found something that works for me, I guess. And I've never had any issues sticking to that plan. I'll take some carbohydrate drink as well, and maybe some solid food at aid stations. But yeah, for me, I found that the strategy is stay away from lots of simple sugars, more complex carbohydrate, but in a form that you can easily take on board, like a gel. And I think people don't realize how important training their gut is. So and people also don't realize how much you need to eat. So now there's studies coming out that say that your gut can tolerate up to 150 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So 3 standard gels is 60 grams. But I think people, if you want to do well, you need to be taking on a lot more than that. And in order to take on more than that, you need to be training your gut. So you need to be taking the same amount of carbohydrate per hour in training, and not just taking it on, but you need to be training at the same intensity as you'd be racing at, and taking on that carbohydrate as well. So it's something that I don't know. I think I've always just been good at eating, to be honest. So I've never had major issues.
I mean, something like the you say that the Western State or the UTMB, which are continuous sort of start to finish races. Would you eat solids during that? You're saying that at the aid stations you might eat some solids. What are we talking about as way of solids for a continuous 100 miler?
At Western States, I didn't have any solids, but it's a short 100 miler, and it's only 18 hours. Some of them take much longer than that. It's all downhill. So at UTMB, for example, they've got noodle soup, at aid stations. So you'd have just some soup and dip some bread in it, something like that, or some crackers, or I can kind of eat anything, I think. So
That'll digest straight away during a race. I'm interested about that. That'll digest straight away, just a quick bowl of noodle soup or something solid, yeah?
Yeah. Because, I mean, you're never running at a super high intensity in a 100-miler.
No.
Right? So as long as you've trained your gut to take on that, then yeah, you absolutely, you can take it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying, because, you know, we ran a race, a 3-day stage race over the Pembrokeshire Coast Pass, which is 186 miles, broken down into 60-odd mile days. You know, and we've had people, you know, take part in that, you know, who've never perhaps done a stage race, you know, and so on the first day they've run it like it was a one-off, like, you know, and they've hardly eaten anything, and then the next day they've struggled. Where the people who take it slower on the first day, you know, and sit down and have like almost like a meal at the aid stations, you know, how would you manage that? Look at the sort of top level, you know, because you've done some, you know, you've done the spine race, and you know, Dragon's Back and stuff like that. You know, is that a different mindset then when you're getting your solids in and you're eating?
Certainly, you need to pay more attention to what you eat afterwards. Yeah. And I think you need to be eating well the whole way through, which is what I would normally do anyway. But it takes longer than 24 hours to completely replenish your glycogen stores. So if you haven't eaten anything on one day, and even if you eat loads when you finish for the day, you don't have long enough to completely replenish your glycogen stores. So you need to be eating well throughout when you're running, and then I would say it's pretty impossible to eat too much afterwards. Just pile on the carbohydrate.
So once you finish at the end of the first stage, you know, you just eat and eat what you can. But, you know, when you look at obviously, you know, you talk about the ultras and the different distances. Obviously, we got the stage races as well. What's your sort of preference? Because you've done a fair few stage races as well. What do you prefer? The continuous 100 or a 3 or 4 day sort of adventure going across, you know, the you know, middle of Wales or something like that? What's your?
I mean, I enjoy both.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the social element of the stage race for sure. I mean, if it's one that you're going to have a bit of time at the end of the day to kind of hang out and have a good time, and that's really fun. I guess recently it's more been about continuous 100 miles for me, and that's more because I want to do the biggest, most competitive races, and they tend to be, you know, continuous races. But I want to do more stage races in the future for sure.
Which is more difficult, Beth? And that might sound like a ridiculous question, but you know, I deal with, in my line of work, with people who compete in Ironman events. And in the build-up to Ironman, every year around for Ironman Wales, the same venue holds what's called a long course weekend. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically it breaks up the 3 Ironman disciplines over 3 days. So rather than do the whole 3 in one day, you do the 2.4 mile swim on a Friday night, 112 mile cycle on a Saturday, and the marathon on the Sunday. And a lot of athletes say they find that harder to go through all the exhaustion, the adrenaline of completing a stage, then have to go to bed, wake up in the morning stiff as a board, have loosen up again, get their competitive juices, if you like, flowing again, and then start from afresh, where, you know, conditions may be different and you've almost got to reset. And they say that's physically and mentally a lot more difficult than starting and being able to push through over one day. Do you find that a similar thing in long distance running?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think when I've done stage races, mentally it's really tiring to wake up and have to race when you're feeling exhausted. Is really, really hard. So I think, but then there'll be other people who would find that a little bit overwhelming, the thought of doing a full Ironman in one go or running 100 miles at one go, and that, you know, that might be so overwhelming they'd prefer to split it up into stages. But physically, I think I'd be the same. I would find it harder to be racing like day in, day out. yeah, I prefer to get it all done in one go, but I understand why the thought of it might be too overwhelming to do it in one go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is getting up in the morning and going again is sometimes the hardest thing, isn't it? And that's when you've got to look after your body more as well. But I mean, just touching on obviously you said the continuous ones, you know, because that's where the sort of the better field is, or you can test yourselves, or it's more of a, you know, the competition there. You know, going back to you know, sort of professionalism and looking at the UK, what do you think is the biggest event in the UK sort of for ultra running? Like, you know, if you had to pick 100, or, you know, what's the sort of the benchmark there, or what would you like to see happen? You know, if you were to look at something in the UK, you know, are we looking at like a trail through the mountains, or one of the flat ones that we've got? What would you like to see personally?
I think it's a really difficult question to say which is like the biggest or most exciting or most prestigious race.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything.
No, I would really. So, have you heard of the Ultra Trail World Tour?
Yeah.
Which is it's a series of you know, 100k plus races around the world that are part of a series, and you can get points from each race, and there's like an overall ranking at the end. We don't have any races in the UK. So I would love to see a race from the Ultra Trail World Tour in the UK, which could be a pre-existing race, or it could be a completely new race. And I know there's a couple of races that are kind of thinking about becoming part of the tour. So I would love to see something like that. I think, you know, races that spring to mind. So 100-mile races are, say, the Lakeland 100. Some of the Centurion races are right up there. West Highland Way race, they're kind of iconic 100-mile races. But yeah, there's no one that is kind of jumping out at me and saying, you know, this is the biggest or most prestigious. But I would love to see another big ultra race in the UK that's drawing a big international field. We have the Skyline Scotland races, obviously in Kinlochleven in September, which are part of the Scarroning or the Golden Trail series now. But there's no sort of it's a bigger focus on the shorter distances there rather than the longer distances. So yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer because there probably isn't an answer.
Yeah.
But I want that to change for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, this is a question you know, it might be quite difficult to answer. Not everyone likes to talk about sort of the money involved in sport, but you know, what sort of purse are we talking about that, you know, for one of the, you know, the big events in Europe compared to, you know, something in the UK, or what would draw ultra runners to an event, sort of, you know, from, you know, the top field? You know, I mean, obviously, you know, it's got to be a good race. I understand that. Yeah, everything else has got to be right for them as well. But, you know, if you were looking at prize money and things like that, what sort of figures are we talking at, you know, to keep people in a professional sort of sport, really, or to professionalize it?
Yeah, I don't know exact numbers. I think there are different ways of doing it, because prize money is one way, or you can you can invite runners to your race and pay them to come.
Yeah.
That's another way of doing it that a lot of races do. So I mean, I honestly couldn't say how. I mean, I think, like, if you want a few like decent sort of domestic runners to come, you probably wouldn't need very much. But if you want, it depends what you want, really. If you want like a massive race with a big international field, then you're probably talking about quite high numbers, like, I don't know, 10, 20 grand, I would say. But yeah, there are some, for example, the Golden Trail series this year. I don't know if you're aware of the Salomon series, Golden Trail series. They're offering a stage race in the Azores as like the grand final, because it's obviously been a write-off for most of their races this year, and they have a total prize pot of €100,000. So yeah, it certainly the prize money is it's
It'll cover the
becoming
flight.
becoming a game changer.
Well, it is, because I'm thinking that when you've got the amount of hours that we're talking that people put into training, and when you look at popularity of sport, everyone runs. Like, you talk about maybe football is the number one played sport in the world and things like that, but running is something that almost everyone does at some stage or has done at some stage. And with these companies, the amount of trainers they sell and running kit and things like that, you'd like to see, it is professionalizing, and the people who inspire people to run. I was again, go back to some of the things I've been watching in lockdown, and these people are inspiring you. And the more you're watching them, the more you get to know all the names of these people within the ultra sort of scene that you may not have, known of all of them before. As a top, the top 5 or 6 or 10 in each gender you might know, but the others, and you see the characters there, and I think there's definitely something there that they should get their just rewards. And you talk about a 10,000 or 20,000 pound prize money things, compared to some sports, that's that's not much at all. So for top level. But I know it's hard for race organisers maybe to find that and to find sponsorship and.
But there's there's a big push now with that. There's more transparency at the higher level for how much people are getting paid. So certainly brands like Adidas and Salomon and Hoka, they've got lots and lots of professional athletes, but no one's allowed to talk about how much they're getting paid, because they've all got non-disclosure agreements and things. And that's something we want to change, because for athletes, I think negotiating sponsorship deals and things is something that we feel really uncomfortable about. It's something that, it's like, how much are we worth? And in many circumstances, you are kind of what you ask for. But yeah, there's no transparency there. And there's huge discrepancies amongst the top runners about about pay and things like that. So that's something we all kind of feel that needs to be changed. And we're also thinking about trying to introduce a sort of a minimum salary for people who are running at a certain level, like according to your ITRA ranking and things like that. I mean, it's not because we no one goes into ultra running because they want to get rich. No. But yeah, I think there's an awful lot of people who are training full time and are getting very, very, very little from it.
Yeah.
And they can't speak up about it because they're not allowed to.
Yeah. And I mean, and that is it, you go back to some of the purists. If you were to put an event on in the UK and say that, we've got this sort of prize money, I'm sure there's some people who say, we don't need, not obviously not the ones who could win it, but the others who would say, it takes away from the fact that we do it as a community. We do it for we love these races because they're sort of quirky and anyone can take part. But then when you are looking at the top level, or you're inspiring people to get better and to train harder and to push themselves, and you've got companies using images of people, and it's only you're saying, what is your worth? Well, what is your worth if they're asking you to wear their t-shirts all the time or wear their trainers, and because they want to sell those on the back of that, it is a difficult one. And it's it's some sports are a lot better where people are are more willing to talk about it, more willing to argue their point and sort of get the best deal for them. Maybe
about the sport as a whole at the moment, Beth, obviously one thing we've avoided talking about so far is the coronavirus pandemic, lockdown and so on. Now, unfortunately, it is an unavoidable topic. There is a fear for sport as a whole now that it'll be a long time before we are restored to any kind of normality after this. Even when events are up and running again, whether they be team sports, individual events, there's going to be a lot of measures in place which may how many people are participating. It may restrict spectators at events, which, as you've touched upon already, is a big part of ultra running. You say you have people all the time telling you where you are, how many minutes you are off first place and so on. I mean, I think on a personal level, I think ultra running is something that is maybe more feasible to get back up and running, excuse the pun, quicker than others, because run an event with the social distance element and that sort of thing. But how much do you fear for the sport as a whole? And we're not just talking about being able to organise events here. We're talking about sponsors who maybe now be more stringent with money than they were pre-lockdown because they're worried about their financial future. Do you think this will have a profound effect on ultra running as a whole?
Yes, and I fear and have most sympathy for the smaller races, race directors and things who will have lost so much in this year that it's not feasible to continue with their races any longer. So I have a lot of sympathy for race directors, both small races and bigger races. And I think even the bigger races, we underestimate how much what effect this is going to have on them. And athletes as well. I think even the really, really big brands who you see as being right up there and you think they wouldn't be affected by this are profoundly affected by it. And it's absolutely going to have a negative impact on their athletes and sponsorship in the future. So yeah, I think that, I mean, as far as racing can, if race directors and races can survive this, I think things will get back to some sort of normality, next year. And we'll be able to continue. But I think, I think a lot of the smaller races are almost going to be knocked out the window at this stage. So yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult. And there certainly will be an adverse impact next year on sponsorship and prize money and that type of thing. And it will take a few years to grow back to where it was.
I mean, the concern for me would be there, you say the smaller races could be knocked off. So, I mean, in the short term, to the spectators and at the top level, you might not notice the effect, but if you're knocking the smaller races off, you're essentially cutting off the people who are maybe just getting into ultra running. And then what you may have is a backlog 2 or 3 years down the line, then a backlog of problems because there isn't the participation levels that there would have been, because not as many people have had the chance to engage in more local events, And another concern we haven't touched upon there is, I'm interested in your view on, obviously, there have been slow signs of late that, so again, flights leaving the UK and that sort of things, there have been a slight lax on that, but we don't know how long travel bans and travel restrictions are going to be in place. So for the more global events, and you've competed in Mont Blanc, you've talked about events in America yourself, could that be another profound effect as well?
Absolutely. For the rest of this year, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about sort of the latter stages of this year and whether any international races will be able to take place. I think, and also for the competitors, I think there'll be a lot of people who, like myself, who are just desperate to get out and race again. But there'll be a lot of people who will have lost so much financially. They can't afford to travel to the other side of the country to do a race at a weekend that costs £100 to enter, or so there might, perhaps there'll be less participation as well. I don't know.
I mean, and on the subject of lockdown, how have you coped yourself? We've talked about training schedules in normal circumstances. Obviously, these are anything but normal, and in the early stages of the lockdown, especially, there was a bit of confusion surrounding it, but we were all limited on how long we could train for, how we could travel from our homes, and of course, coastal paths were shut as well. So, without admitting to breaking any rules yet, how did you cope with it, and how did you get the hours and the miles in that you needed to?
So I'm fortunate, I guess, in that I live like in a village. So, yeah. And I can get out onto footpaths. I can go out into the fields without actually going on a road at all. Right. So I've been out. My running from home has been fine. I don't live in the Peak District, so I don't have like the peaks at easy reach during lockdown. So I've been able to run, small hills, sort of up to about 150 meters. And so I've done a lot of loops. I've got a set of woods that I was doing like loops in for like 4 hours at one stage, which was, really difficult. And so, I think I've been luckier than most in that, I can get out and things, and don't have to look after young children at home or any of these other problems that the other runners have had. And yeah, but I mean, the biggest problem for a lot of people has been motivation, and I have admit that I found it really difficult at times to I mean, most of the time, 90% of the time I enjoy running, but it's that 10% that if you're training for a big race, you wouldn't even think about whether to do a session or not. You would just do it. But then when you're really, really tired, and you think, what am I training for? Like, do I really have to do this session? Actually, it can be really, really difficult. So yeah, I admit that there was a few weeks in the middle where I really, really struggled. I got really down, and I found it very, very difficult to find a reason to train. And for me, I know that it's happened to me before, so I wasn't really alarmed by it. I knew it would get better, and now I'm feeling much more motivated and things. But yeah, I did really struggle at one stage.
I was going to say, you didn't feel the need to do a marathon in your garden or an ultra in your garden like so many people are doing.
No, the most I ever did was we've got this tiny little field at the back. Just to show some empathy for people who couldn't leave, I did loops of this tiny little field, and I managed 10 miles. And I was like, oh, that's it. I can't do any more. So I have a lot of respect who've been doing people who are doing marathons in their gardens.
Well, we had one guy on, former Welsh rugby captain Ryan Jones, and he did a marathon in his garden, and then a few weeks later, he did 100 miles on his treadmill in his kitchen. And I was just thinking, 100 miles on a treadmill must be, have you ever done anything like that? You never? No. Well,
I mean, I don't have a treadmill, thankfully. So, yeah. I mean, the closest I've ever got to that is running, doing one of those track races, a 24-hour race. But that's different because there's lots of people around and it's kind of fun. So
how far did you get in 24 hours? Was that continuous 24 hours, and to see how far you could get, was it?
143 miles, I think.
In 24 hours.
I mean, it's okay. It's not amazing, but
there's a serious actual point to this conversation, because I've spoken to other ultra runners who have touched on this as well, and obviously it's a completely different psychology on a track or even on any kind of race loop, where even if you're talking a 10k race which is split into two 5k loops, the second time round it can get a bit monotonous. All right, you might know your checkpoints of where you are maybe, but you're looking at the same thing, you've got the same scenery. Are you someone who likes the almost refreshing aspect of a trail race where you don't know the scenery's changing on every corner? You don't know what's coming up, what's coming around. 1 minute you might be on the coast path looking out at the sea, the next you're going through a forest. Does that help keep you mentally sharp during races, help you make and your mental focus as well? The fact is you have got to be switched on and do a different turn, everywhere you go, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% will prefer to do a linear or looped trail race than anything on loops. It just makes it so much more interesting, and it gives you other things to think about, I guess. Although most of the races I've done recently, I've actually known the course in advance, which does it really, really helps in terms of being competitive, but it just takes a little bit away from it in the way that it's not all new and exciting, and less of distraction sort of on the course when you're wowing at the scenery and things.
I guess to counter that at the top level, that's the kind of preparation you need to put in, though, don't you? You need to really.
Yeah. There's no doubt that it does help. Yeah, sure.
And what about your own cleansing of the mind, so to speak? Again, we've had ultra runners on here before, and they'll talk a lot about. They'll think about even in races, not just training, but mostly training. They'll think about a lot of things, a lot of life things, a lot of things nothing to do with running. It might be worries, concerns they may have. It might be home decisions they've got to make, and they'll go over them in their head whilst they're out, on the coast path, in the woods, on whatever trail it may be. Are you another one of those? Are you focused on your running the whole time you're out there, or does your mind wander as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, during a race, like, there's no time. I don't find that I think about anything else but the race. But when I'm training, yeah, I mean, a lot of people say they go out and they just stop thinking about everything, and it kind of. But I am one of those people that can, well, if I go out on a run, I'm thinking about something, I can still be thinking about it an hour later when I come back. Which is, I mean, it would be nice to be able to go out the door and know that that bit of work that I was thinking of would completely like leave my head. But no, I'm one of those people that I do think about things a lot when I'm running, which is good in a way because you have that extra time to think about these things. But sometimes it would be nice to, you know, to come back with a completely free and empty mind.
I tell you what I find is when you're out, I was out yesterday on the coastal path, and you have some brilliant thoughts. You wish you had a notepad, because when I get back then, my mind's just blank and I can't remember anything of what I was out there. It's almost like you're creative when you're out and about, and you're thinking, oh, that's a brilliant idea. And then you finish and it's gone. So
do you not take your phone with you? A quick voice recording?
I could try
I do
that.
I do that sometimes actually when I think of something.
Oh, I could try that. So when, you know, if we're looking at obviously after COVID-19, when are you thinking that you would feel comfortable, you know, to get back into doing a race or an event? You know, are you aiming for anything? Or, I mean, and the comfortable thing is, you know, with the environment that we're in, and, you know, like if there was a local one on to you now next month, just say, and there was going to be a small field, you know, and everything's set for you, would you feel comfortable in taking part in that?
I would, if the right measures were put in place. Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, I would be happy doing that. I think that it's very difficult to make plans at the moment. I think it's good to have, so I have some small goals in mind, but I'm also keeping an open mind, and, you know, if these things are unable to happen, I'm not going to be devastated about it. So I'm kind of keeping an open mind, but yeah, it's starting to, there's a few things in the calendar that I'm thinking, it's looking more likely that this will happen now. But I think we'll start to see some smaller races fairly soon, actually, and with changes in place like staggered starts, or maybe even like time trial style races. And I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't start fairly soon if the right measures are in place. Yeah,
I mean, we've got, you know, the reason Master, we've got an event now which is meant to be on this month. In fact, what date is it? Next week, which is our coast path, you know, the 186 miles over 3 days. Always a small field. That run the whole lot. But, you know, I've put it back to next month, to near the end of next month, and that's with the provision of, you know, telling everyone, well, you know, it still may not go ahead, but we're going to look at that. And to be honest with you, I've got more interest this year than ever before. You know, it's quite a, you know, without getting the sort of the top runners in on it, it's a very hard event to complete. So a lot of local people look at it and think they'd love to complete the Pembrokeshire Coast Path, but they're not sure, you know, of how difficult it is. But I'm actually having, you know, more messages now, and people offer and say, look, can I pay for it now? I said, well, we're not taking any bookings or anything. We're going to see how it goes. But yeah, so it's interesting. I found that, yeah, people are starting, like this week now, starting to get not desperate, but you know, they're starting to contact you again and thinking of coming out of this and thinking, you know, we want something to do, like, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people have a lot more time and flexibility at the moment. You know, no one's planning on going on holiday to Spain in July anymore. No. So they've suddenly got, you know, a bit more free time, and all their other races are cancelled. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that people are getting really desperate for a race. Yeah, and I'm sure that, well, I'm not sure, but if things carry on the way they are, I think it's highly likely it should be able to go ahead. I don't know what your plans are with accommodation. Are people camping or? Well,
we normally stay in bunkhouses, but because it's been quite limited sort of numbers. They've had dorms to themselves. It's not like they've had to share. So, but the bunkhouses are still closed, and they probably, you know, we have camped. We've done it a couple of times. We've either camped or we've used bunkhouses. So we're gonna have to look at accommodation also. You know, one of the big things is the local communities that we're going to be going through. We're going to have to make sure that they're happy with it, and that
absolutely. So yeah, I think
so. There's a lot of things you've got to put in place on, you know, managing the social distancing, managing the, you know, the health and safety of it, and reducing the spread of any virus, but also it's the perception of it as well. That's
and absolutely, as race directors, you need to like keep the communities on your side, don't you? That's really, really important, because if anything were to go wrong, then the future of the race is in jeopardy. But it sounds like, I'm sure you'll do the right thing, whatever decision you decide to make.
Yeah.
What Finn's trying to say, Beth, is the race available. If you go on the website and pay to enter it.
I just saying now. I say you've got to know your value. I've just priced myself out of it, like, you know. No, it's just it's just interesting to see what, you know, people's views are on people, you know, getting back to race. Obviously, you know, working in the medical profession as well, like, you know, you may be a bit more sort of say savvy, or, you know, than the average person. So I just wanted to sort of run that by you. But hopefully we will start to get a few things back up and running before the end of the year, and they're going to be small. I'm almost thinking of, because, you know, we've done a few events which have got up, you know, Coast Path Trails, which have got up to 400 people. Almost thinking of going back to what it was like, you know, 6-7 years ago, when it's like, where we're going to really keep the events small and low key, like, you know, maybe for next year. I don't know. It's a difficult one. It is difficult. But we'd like to go more down the ultra route as well. And I know it's really interesting talking to you about sort of how to professionalize that, and looking at, you know, ways of creating some sort of, you know, ultra, you know, series, and looking at, you know, because I'm fascinated by that, and it's more of a pleasure of mine to get these people and see, you know, and see the achievements. You know, that's when we do those events, you know, it's like watching people like yourselves and how you cope with, you know, the strains and the pressures of the distances and the fatigue and the tiredness. And, you know, we haven't even touched on that, you know, like, you know, when you're doing like an 18-20 hour race, you know, are you sleeping at all? You know, you just, you know, it's
no, not sleeping. I mean, I think the longest race I've done took me 32 hours. I mean, the longest like single stage race or single day race took me 32 hours, and I was fine. You know, I didn't need to sleep during that. But yeah, and anything longer than sort of 48 hours, I would say you need to have a little bit of sleep. But yeah.
What sort of trail was train was that on then? 32 hours continuous.
This was the Grand Raid Reunion. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Which is a 100-mile race on Reunion Island, and it's savage. It's a slow 100-miler, a lot of ascent and a lot of really technical terrain. But yeah, super cool race, but it takes a long time.
So just last before we start rounding up, something like the Barkley doesn't interest you, does it? Or, you know, I mean, real quirky races like that, or?
I really enjoy following the Barkley. I have no intention of trying to get in myself. No. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, and I love following it, and I love I'm interested in the mentality of the people that do want to do it, but I'm not one of those people. No.
Beth, one as well, last thing for me, and I'm interested in for any athlete in any sport, whether if you're competing seriously in it, doesn't matter if you're professional, amateur, what have you. Everyone needs downtime. Everyone needs away time and wind and relax. Now, for you, I imagine that's more difficult than most. We've touched upon the long hospital shifts you have to do. It's an intense job. It's an intense environment. Combine that with the sport you compete in at a high level, which requires, you know, extortionate amount of training time. What is your downtime, and when do you get to maybe switch off from, you know, the pressures of life, if you like, if that's for want of a better?
I think that my work and running actually complement each other really well. So I don't find that I need the downtime. I think so. Running, you know, it's a very selfish sport most of the time, right? We're doing it for ourselves pretty much. And I think if I was doing that all the time, I would feel a bit like, I don't know how to say it, but you know, I'm not sure I'd like the person I was if that's all I did in my life, right? But whereas when you're at work, you're literally never thinking about yourself. So I think in that way, they complement each other quite well. And I don't feel like I need, I mean, work is stressful. Running is not stressful. Yes, physically and mentally, they're both demanding, but no, I don't feel like I need time away from both, to be honest, because they're so different.
And just hypothetically now, fast forwarding maybe a year, all's well, you've had your backdated sabbatical. So you've had whether it be 6 months, a year, or whatever, to concentrate solely on your trail running. Where do you want to be ideally at the end of that sabbatical? Have you got a goal?
It would be nice to win a race.
An international or a global race?
Yeah. But I don't want to, like, I'm not one of those people who likes to set a goal, a super high goal, because if I don't achieve it, I'll get upset about it. So all I want to do is I want to try and be the best I can be. Whatever the result is, you know, I'll accept that. But as long as I know that I've given it everything,
and you've gone full tilt,
exactly, then I'll be happy, you know. But yeah, it would be nice to win or even, you know, first, second, or third at either Western States or UTMB. I'd be pretty chuffed with that. But yeah, more than anything, as long as I'm happy that I've done my absolute best and my training has been perfect, and I know that I've sort of reached my potential, I guess, then I'll be happy.
You negotiated that one pretty well. I was hoping for an outlandish #1 in the world statement or something.
No, definitely not.
So when you say reach your potential, you know, again, this is open-ended with ultra runners. You know, how long do you think the career is now for for an ultra runner at the top level? You know, can you put an age on it, or is it just? Do you think, you know, the window is between sort of 25 and 40, or is
no,
it
I don't think you can
down to the individuals?
Yeah, I think it's down to. I think it's hard to. I mean, so there's plenty of people who compete at a really high level for many years and are really consistent with their performances. And I think you can do that, you know, 40, 45, or even longer. I think that it's more a time, as in a total time you're at the top for. So I think if you're going to be like, there's one obvious exception, which is probably Killian, but if you're going to be really the best in the world at what you're doing, I think the training is such that it's probably not going to be sustainable for that long. So there are very few people who have been really at the top for more than a couple of years. But plenty of people who've been very close to the top and they can sustain it for longer.
But to reach that top there, it's an ever, you know, you're on the peak for a short period and then you sort of
down on the whole.
Bit, like,
there are obvious exceptions, but on the whole, like, if you're training that hard and competing at that level, I don't think it's sustainable. It's not sustainable for most people. Yeah, well, it's my feeling.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you know, people talk as well, like, you know, when the things, and you always see loads of articles on it. This is the toughest race in the world. This is the toughest race. You know, the Dragon's Back is the toughest stage race in the world. The Spine race as well. Or that's toughest. In your, you know, opinion, obviously, because it is down to obviously individuals performing. What's the toughest sort of stage race that you've completed in, first of all, and then the toughest sort of single day race?
Well, probably the spine race is the toughest. I mean, it's not really a stage race as such,
no,
but it takes multiple days for sure, more because of the weather and the challenge that throws in. In terms of single race, probably the race I mentioned before on Reunion Island, Grand Raid Reunion or Diagonale de Fou, which is just crazy. But there are tougher races out there for sure, which I have yet to compete in.
Yeah. And do you think that the tougher ones, is it something about it is the toughest which attracts people, or is there people who are competing at a higher level will probably not want to go to the toughest all the time because you're looking at time, a time that you want to beat? What's your views on that?
I don't think ultra runners really think about times very much.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard of anyone going. I mean, maybe there are a few people who want to do a super fast flat 100 miler, but for most people, I don't think we think about times. We think more about some people who will be attracted to a race because it's like the toughest or something. But for me, it doesn't really feature. It's more about the location and the competition, the crowds, and things like that.
That's good. I mean, just before we round up there, and obviously anything else you want to sort of say, it's been really interesting sort of speaking to you, and for the people who listen to us. I mean, we always get good response from when we got ultra runners on, because I think people are sort of fascinated, and a lot of people, want to know the mindset of and the little things, and I'm just thinking, because it is one of those things that people think, could I do that? Could I go and run 100 miles? Could I go and do a 4-day, 400-mile event or something? So, and when you do speak to these people, they're just sort of normal people.
Absolutely, very, very normal.
It's very normal, but there's something obviously that makes them tick, But so that's fascinating. But anything you want to say, Fraser, before I add on?
No, just like you say, it's been interesting, and I hope that the sabbatical does work out for you, and obviously push on. And no, it has been an interesting talk and interesting insight again, and to, so many aspects to ultra running than simply running and training and going out and doing 100 miles, and it's good to know.
Awesome.
Brings hope to me immortals as well, that Beth struggled with motivation during lockdown as well, I think. A lot of couch potatoes will take heart from that the elite have the same thoughts.
I think there's been a big divide, hasn't there? Some people have got fitter than ever because they've got so much more time on their hands, and other people have been working hard and been struggling a bit.
I think at the other end of the scale, it's got people out. It's forced people to go out who've never been out in their lives before, even walks and things like that. So it's certainly been, like you say, a divide in who's been frustrated by it and who's been given a new lease of life by it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's so anything you want to add, Beth, before we I round up with this little thing that we do?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys, and I have my fingers crossed for your race next month.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'll have a look to see what I'm doing at that, if I'm working or not that weekend.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to speak to you again, get your opinion on sort of looking at sort of putting like a trail, an ultra series on and things like that, and sort of looking at where we could go with that, because that's definitely something that we want to look to progress and sort of look to sort of help in, let's say, professionalising within the UK. So that's something I definitely want to discuss further.
Sure.
But before we finish, what we always do now, we do a bit of a lowdown. So we just ask you 2 questions.
Yeah.
And you give us the answer of what you would choose. All right. So simple as that. Try not to think too hard on it. They're not. So if you were stuck in lockdown for another 3 weeks and you had to give up social media or TV, which one would it be?
I don't watch TV anyway.
Don't you?
No. So TV?
TV.
But I also like the idea of giving up social media, but we'll go with TV.
That's good. Right. Ideal, stage or continuous? I know we've touched on some of these, but
continuous.
Continuous. UTMB or Western States?
Western States.
Ooh. Right. And this is the last one, and we haven't touched on this, although you have mentioned your partner. I know you run a lot with your dog as well, don't you? So if you were stuck in lockdown for another 3 weeks, and we had to really isolate, we had to go back to the old days.
Yeah.
And you can only have for 3 weeks your dog or your partner in the house.
Well, the dog would be
He
happier.
doesn't come back through the room at this point.
The dog would be happier in the garden. I could live without either fairly happily for 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, for 3 weeks you live without either. See, that's what it takes to be a top level ultra runner. She's all in the mindset, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I don't need anything. I just do it.
I think trainers or partner would have been a more provocative question there.
That would be easier. Yeah, that would be obvious. I'd keep the trainers.
Keep the trainers, yeah. Only for 3 weeks. Nice to have a little break every now and again, isn't it? Well, yeah, I hope things get back to normal as soon as whatever normal is going to be when we come out of this, as soon as possible. But yeah, it's been really good chatting to you. And
you guys, thank you.
We'll be in touch, all right? And
yeah,
thank you very much.
Take care, Beth.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, bye.
Cheers.